Oh, hey guys. I'm just notifying Homeschools Connected that we are live wired, people. We are alive, and it is time to thrive. We are alive, and it is time to thrive. Let's notify Homeschools Connected. All right. Hey guys, we are live. All right, we've notified the people. And now, let's grab TikTok. Get rid of all these extra apps we don't need open.
Tallest tower.
Well, that's my video I posted a little while ago. It's crushing. All right, let's see. Video I posted earlier this morning is really crushing. Okay. All right. And let's give this a title. We'll call it Fake Studies. All right, let's go live. Let's do this thing. Let's grab the masses of people. I come live to you, the people. My very, very Bush League setup I have going here. Leaning this phone on kerosene, of all things. All right, here we go. We are live. 3, 2, 1. Good morning, TikTok. We are here with YouTube, and it is a beautiful day here in the sunny south. It's a little bit overcast, but hey, it could be raining, it could be storming, there could be an ice storm. So things are looking green and things are looking up. I'm here with my beautiful dog, Lucy Lou. She is brown and white, and she has a long snout, and God, do I love her. Hey, Alicia, yes, we're here to talk about fake studies. I posted about it on classicallearner.com, the TikTok channel, earlier today, and this is the type of stuff that is pushed down. It's why most of society is unable to think critically, is unable to question things. Where yesterday I posted about, well, you know what, let's get right into the fake studies. And this stuff it's really fascinating. It was really interesting to read about, and it's so important in today's day and age, in a time where the field of science has been used to justify the limitation or restriction on basic human rights. So because of that, the study of science and what our children learn about science is more important than ever before. And if you look at Hey Netty Games, everyone should check out Netty Games. If you look into there are certain things that I'm aware of that the system makes it very hard to propagate, right? Because the system, they know if people were aware of these things, then they would certainly question more of the authoritative narratives coming out of Washington, coming out of places all over the world, or, whatever it might be, whether it's social media companies controlling the message, whether it's the mainstream media, whether it's Hollywood and their propagation of certain narratives. If people understood that the things that I've been posting about the last few days actually existed, they would start to see through the veil and say, oh, so I see what this is. They are taking science, something that's beautiful, the scientific method, which As for anyone that follows me, when I talk about how we teach our children these things, it's just as important that you teach them the method as it is that you teach them the alleged or the authoritative science behind whatever it is that they're learning. So anyway, let's get into it. A couple of years ago, there were a few college professors. There was the 3 college professors, and they had observed what they believed to be corruption in the field of social sciences. So these 3 professors got together and said, let's do a scientific experiment in which we draw a hypothesis. And their hypothesis was that if they created fake studies that concluded the right social narratives, and they pinpointed what those narratives would be, and they submitted those studies to the most respected journals, peer-reviewed stuff in the United States of America and the world, that they would be published. That was their hypothesis, that it didn't have to be rooted in truth. And in fact, they set up the studies so that each study that they created would be more and more ridiculous, like complete and utter absurdities. But if they were to attach the certain conclusions that were in alignment with the politically driven social agendas of the day, that these very well-respected journals would in fact publish their findings. And boy, oh boy, did they prove their hypothesis in spades. So they set up these scientific studies, and like I said, each one was more ridiculous than the last, and they get into a territory where, you're going to have to check my video on classicallearner.com to get to the article, because I don't even know if I could talk about all this stuff. So I'll get into one of them. So one of the studies they set up is they did a study into a word that rhymes with shape culture, but involves the violation of human beings. So they did a study into shape culture, but involves the violation of usually girls, right? And they said they were studying shape culture using observing the behavior of dogs, right? Observing the behavior of dogs. So they make up this whole study, and they said that they observed how dogs interact with one another. They inspected, this was part of their study, they said that they inspected the twigs and berries of nearly 10,000 dogs, right? So they observed dogs, they inspected the twigs and berries of 10,000 different dogs, and they interviewed all of these dog owners, on the sexual preference of these different dogs. And what their study found, and what they concluded from their study, was that shape culture would be reduced and there would be less of it if men were trained like dogs. And this was their study, their fake study. And they submitted this, and it would wind up being published in a very well-respected journal. The whole review situation, you got to separate these words because the craziness in this world. So they did that, and they did a variety of different studies. Stuff that's so vulgar that they put in the studies that I'm not going to talk about here. Another study that they had published, which really interesting stuff, is they took a chapter from the book written by Mean Mr. Mustache, the guy that has the opposite mustache of me. I shave it here to show how against those events I am. But, he shaved it here, right? So they took the book written by Mean Mr. Mustache, and they basically changed the language around just slightly to make it look like a feminist paper. And their the actual chapter from me and Mr. Mustache's book was published by this scientific journal, um, as feminism, and they wound up doing a bunch of different studies, and they had an 80% success rate getting their nonsense studies published. So, from their scientific study, their hypothesis was proven on what would happen with these peer-reviewed journals if the conclusions matched the intrinsic bias and political agendas of the journals themselves. That is a startling finding, because if 80% of those could be published, then you have to say, okay, well, how much of what we know to be true from these authorities actually is true? And then you cross-reference that with the video I posted yesterday. The video I posted yesterday on a very well-respected research center that attempted to, and I have to be very careful what I say here, but basically they attempted to, when you do the scientific method, there are two things that are very important. And you want to make sure that your study has validity. Does your study measure what it claims to attempt to measure, right? So if we were measuring how many liters of water this cup can hold, and we set up an experiment, it would have validity if the experiment actually measured how many liters of water this cup could hold, right? So does your experiment measure what it is supposed to measure? That's scientific validity. And reliability, which has to do with replication. If you do a scientific study and then other scientists attempt to replicate your study, are they able to do that? And if it has validity and it has, it's able to be replicated, then it's said to be sound science. So anyway, they wanted to see how many of these studies you can do that with. And they attempted to do this with 100 different studies, 100 different studies from the most respected journals in the world. And what they found was that they were able to successfully replicate 38 of the 100. So 38%, which means there was a 62% failure rate. And then they wound up getting into how the whole system is set up, how people's tenure is based on this, their social status, their livelihood, and all of the incentives are set up even from the journals themselves, which get status and esteem from posting cutting-edge findings, usually related to the stuff that, matches the agendas of the day, right? And between what I just said with the fake studies and with, this whole situation with the replication, you have to question, okay, so if under 50% of all of these, ironclad journal findings, and I just have to talk around this stuff, unfortunately, but if under 50% of them are valid, then most of what you hear when they say this is backed up by the studies, it's actually less than a coin flip. You see the problem? And then what happens is, because this stuff, and this is, you are not very smart. Thank you for your opinion on how I'm not very smart, because I'm sure you'd be able to hold a conversation with me. But, so what happens is, then you have this stuff that is reviewed, it's peer reviewed, but guys, I want everyone to stop and appreciate how intelligent ABEX 5 is. Can we all stop and appreciate it? I'd like to stop and appreciate how we are blessed with their presence. So what happens is, then you have accepted science. So based on that acceptance, what happens is, wow, oh my God, thank you. We care so much about what you have to say. Oh my God, you said I have no logic. And you back that with no evidence. You've probably been just getting that from these studies. You're brainwashed because you have been trained to view science the same way a churchian views religion, right? You understand that? You have a religion, and I have held up a black mirror to your scientific doctrine, and anyone in a lab coat is essentially a priest to you. See, what I'm talking about is the scientific method. What I'm talking about is the beauty of science, the beauty of the scientific method, and the beauty of validity and reliability, all these things that I'm sure you have no concept of. But anyway, I digress. I'm sure you're just the most intelligent person in the room. So then what you have is you have this accepted doctrine that comes out of science, and then good scientists, who are good people, build additional studies into other areas on an underlying foundation that is rooted in falsehoods. And because the foundation of the science is rooted in falsehoods, everything that's built on top of it is actually wrong. It's like if you go to build a building, but the foundation is off, it's crooked, like I'm sure Abex knows so much about, knows so much about. If you go to build that foundation and you're slightly off at an angle, by the time that building is 50 stories high, it will collapse, right? Well, and that is the problem we have with modern science today. See, Abex trusts, he believes like a religion, right? He trusts, he believes, but it's not rooted in any actual evidence, right? And because of that, you can't question his doctrine. Where, if it wasn't like a religion, he would know about this stuff. In fact, Nature, you want to talk about scientific authority. Nature is a very respected scientific journal, took a survey of 1,500 scientists on just this matter alone. And don't take it from me, 1,500 scientists, yeah, and that's why you don't know. That's why your whole understanding is rooted in belief, because you can't accept that your entire worldview is rooted in nonsense. Because if your education is based off of a foundation rooted in nonsense, then what you believe is nonsense. So 1,500 scientists who are more honest than Apex were surveyed, and 90% of them said there is a very, very serious problem right now with replication. Go, Apex, type in Nature, and then go look up this survey, and then I want you to go, now, don't argue with me, argue with the scientist. So, and by the way, people like this, these are usually like they lie, not only lie to themselves, they lie to everyone else. I would bet that Abex doesn't actually have a degree in engineering. Just so you know, I'm a rocket scientist. I'm a physicist. You're wrong. Oh, man. Oh, man. I just saw a TikTok on Buzz Aldrin saying he didn't go to the moon. Yes, so if you don't have to TikTok that. You can go to YouTube, and you can type in Conan O'Brien interviews Buzz Aldrin about the moon landing, and that interview will blow your mind. And if the news media was more honest, that would have been probably the biggest news story of the month it came out, because what Buzz actually said is, Conan said to him, I remember when I was a child watching you go to the moon, or something along those lines. And Buzz Aldrin said, no, you don't. No, you don't. And he's like, what are you talking about? I remember watching you. He's like, no, you didn't. And Conan was like, Buzz, I remember watching you. And he said, no, you didn't watch me go to the moon. Those were videotapes. That was acting, right? That wasn't actually live tape. And, talk about a revelation, because for 40 years, 50 years, whatever, they told everyone that that was live footage of them going to the moon. And just like the tree of the poisonous fruit, when you have these institutions that are lying to you, you have to get to the crux of why they are lying to you. And unlike Abex, who lies about having a degree in engineering, and he tuck-tailed and run as soon as I brought that up, unlike Apex, I actually do have a degree as a historian. I specifically study propaganda. In fact, Abex, not only do I have a degree as a historian, I got a 4.0 GPA in my master's program, and I graduated and got the award for being the #1 student in my entire class. And what I specifically specialize in, what I'm an authority in, is propaganda. And when you start to understand propaganda and you start to see through the lies, the veil of lies, you start to see, wow, a lot of these doctrines that are taught to children from a young age as being factual, these scientific facts or historical facts, or, these days they even pervert math. I mean, they'll look these kids in the eyes and say, 2 + 2 is 5. And then you'll say, holy shish, George Orwell was, man, did he predict the future. That boy was prophetic. I mean, I don't want to call him a boy, but that man was prophetic. The fact that you think it's hard to get a bachelor's says everything I need to know about you. Well, if it's not hard to be a bachelor's, why do you listen so much to all these people, these authorities? You're like, oh my God, I trust the science. I believe in the science. Don't you see that's the problem, Abex? Let me explain something to you. The same fallen nature that corrupts religious institutions like Catholic Church and whatnot, the same fallen nature, greed, ego, desire for social status, corruption, money, power, the same corrupting forces that corrupt the church corrupted the beautiful institution of science. And then science became settled. And, I like to think of that as the root word of a settlement, personally. Like, we had a business meeting and now that the deal has been settled, right? And you know this because anytime you have large authoritative bodies telling you that you can't question certain doctrines, right? That you can't question certain doctrines, well, how is it still science? Right? How is it still science if you can't question it? Isn't the very nature of science to be able to question it? And thank you for blocking him. That guy had no value here. And because he embraces lies, probably not much, Anyway, we don't need to get too much into that guy. But the point is that these studies are very real. And yeah, you kind of see bad for people like that. But then you don't feel bad because they come into chat rooms like this and it's like, all right, guy. All right, guy. So when we teach our children science, we teach them, we really need to stress the scientific method, and we really need to stress the importance of questioning even the most settled of doctrines. In fact, especially in questioning the most settled, because all of the truly great discoveries throughout humanity have come from people who question things that they have been told they're not supposed to question, they're not allowed to question, right? Because these things, just like churchy and religious doctrines, are set up where they say, you are not allowed to question this, because if you question this, it threatens all of our status, all of the money and the power. So when we teach children science, we need to focus on the scientific method, we need to focus on validity, we need to focus on reliability, we need to focus on what we actually know. Yesterday I was on a podcast, which was a big achievement for me because someone I really, really respect. And I was on the podcast of Crow 777 Radio, CRROW 777 Radio, and we had a 2-hour conversation about everything that is education, everything that is history, everything that is science. And Crow is he's such a wealth of knowledge. And his catchphrase is belief is the enemy of knowing. And Abex, his entire worldview is based on belief. So let me give you an example. So this week, as part of our homeschool community, we have our children doing a scientific study related around the oxidation process. And the mainstream narrative of the oxidation process is essentially this, that if you cut an apple, the reason it browns is it goes through oxidation. So when the oxygen hits the apple, it removes electrons from the apple, causing it to brown. So you have the children read about that. Then you have them take an apple, cut it into 9 separate slices, put one slice to the side, because every time you do an experiment involving science with a child, you have to have a scientific control, because we're teaching them to actually do the scientific method. So the apple on the side, just watched it. Buzz literally called the moon landing animation. Yes, those are Buzz Aldrin's words, not mine. Now, I didn't need Buzz Aldrin to tell me that. I knew that years before Buzz Aldrin said that. You know why? Because I use this little thing. I take all that trust and belief that Apex has, and I push it to the side, and I use this little thing called discernment, right? And it takes about 5 minutes of examining the moon landing to, at the very least, know that a lot of the narrative around it is fictitious and a lie. And then years after I figured that out, Buzz Aldrin came out and admitted that. And of course, the news media's, that should have been the biggest story in, the last year in America, right? I mean, you're talking about the most significant event in the last century of America, the landing on the moon. And then you have the guy who did it coming out and saying, no, that was a lie, the tape everyone thinks they watched. Yeah, that's a big deal, isn't it? That's a really big deal. Anyway, back to the apples. So they cut the apple into 9 slices. You take one apple piece, you put it to the side, you set up a scientific control. And the reason you do that is we're teaching them the method. We're teaching them to try to use their discernment. And we're teaching them how to do actual science. So then they take the 8 apple slices and they cover one in orange juice, one in lemon juice. It doesn't really matter what you cover in them. You could do vinegar, you could do olive oil. I don't really care what you use. You can use sugar water, salt water. And you lay out all the apple slices, and then you have your child observe which apple slices turn brown. And you separate into 2 different areas. First, what happened to your control? Most likely, the control should turn brown, so your child could observe. The apple that didn't have anything on it turned brown. I don't know what's going to happen with the other apples. Maybe some of them will turn brown, some of them won't. Like, maybe probably the apple covered in lemon juice, because usually that's a preservative, won't brown as quickly. And they could make these observations, and they could observe everything that happened. Don't tell me what you think happened. Tell me what you see. What are your ears and your eyes and your nose and your mouth and your fingers? Tell me what your senses tell you. What do you see? What do you observe? I observed that the control turned brown. I observed that the lemon didn't, and then you point out, what are the independent variables? The lemon juice, the orange juice, the vinegar. These are all independent variables. What is the dependent variable? The flesh of the apple after it's exposed to oxygen is the dependent variable. You have them identify the independent, the dependent, right? And you have them first jot down, what do you observe? What do you know? Okay. Based on what you've read, what you think you know from your reading, and the combination of what you observed, what do you think happened? I think that, or they might say, I know that oxidation took place, the electrons were removed from the apple by the oxygen and it turned brown. Okay, how do you know that? Because I read about oxidation and then I watched the apple turn brown. Yeah, but do you know that, or did you observe the brownie? Did you actually see any electrons? Well, not like with your eyes. Did you see any electrons? No. Okay, so you didn't observe yourself this happening with the electrons. Now, does that mean it didn't happen? No, it might have happened. It probably did happen. But in terms of what you know, we now have to separate our belief from what we know. What we know is that when an apple slice is exposed to the air we breathe, the oxygen, it turns brown. We believe the reason that's happening is because of the electrons. So what future questions do we have? Our future questions would be, how can we set up an experiment in which we can test for or observe the actual electrons being pulled out of the apple, or measure the electrons being pulled out of the apple? And then once we set up that experiment, if we can do that, now we know. Now that falls into the category we have confirmed. We know that this is sound science. Now, I'm sure there are experiments you could pull up in which you can measure, or maybe not, I don't know. See, that's my belief. And that's rooted in good stuff. Like, it's rooted, my belief. Okay, I think that's probably accurate. But before I know if that's accurate, I'd have to go and pull up, if there was an experiment done, rooted in that, then see if it's been replicated by other people. Is it just once, like, is there validity to it, right? And this is how you're training your child's brain to how they actually could know things. Versus belief is the enemy of knowing. It's the same way we study history, where you teach your child to separate what do you know, what did you get from first-hand sources, from primary documents, versus what is your conjecture. I created a unit study on the Georgia Guidestones this week. It's for high school students and more advanced middle school students. But basically, I was able to locate through sourcing and through clicking on a lot of blue links, the manifesto written by the people who built the Georgia Guidestones. And it was their manifesto. They wrote it. It's amazing that 99% of people don't know about it. I was actually surprised it existed. I was like, oh, wow, okay, great. You know, no one knows about it, but now they do. I'm actually going to be, oh, shoot. All right, I got to go soon. All right, I'm going to be on InfoWars at 11 o'clock. It's not with Alex Jones. It's not his main show. It's one of the guys that have a show on InfoWars. But they inboxed me a couple of days ago, and they were like, do you want to come on? And I was like, yeah. Why wouldn't I go on? So I'm going to be on InfoWars in like 30 minutes, apparently. So I should probably cut. I forgot about that, by the way. Good thing I just remembered that. I have to cut this short. Okay, so yeah. So anyway, we did a study into the Guidestone. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And so we did a study into the Guidestones, and basically the whole purpose of it is to teach children how to get back to the primary document, and then how to take the information in the primary document and separate what is true from what is interesting or conjecture, or, you know, what you can deduce, right? So like some of the things that are interesting and you can deduce from that document is like, it's really interesting stuff. 3 of the people, including the main guy who worked on the Guidestones, were 32nd degree Freemasons. Does that mean I know the Freemasons were behind the Guidestones? No. Right? Now, that can be someone's unique theory and understanding about what happened, and I can't tell them they're wrong. At least it's rooted in good information, right? But they have to know in their mind, okay, I know that Masons worked on the project, and I think they might have been behind it. I don't know for sure that the Freemasons did the project. And by the way, that's not my belief. I don't think the Masons did the project. I think my belief is that whoever did it, it was probably a small cult-like group, and they had a lot of means available. They were, it might have been one of those, like, there was that guy Rainier. It was not like a quite small cult, like it's huge. There was the chick that starred in the Smallville movies that like wound up being in his cult. A group like that, in my opinion, not that group. It was, yeah, I should do TikToks on that. That group is fascinating. But a group like that had probably, they were probably radicalized by the corporate media and the narrative about what's going on with the climate and the religion of modern scientism. And because of that, they think, basically their conclusion was that government should pass laws controlling. I'm going to put a few words around this because it's smart to put a few words around this breeding of humans to basically limit that. That's basically the manifesto behind the Guidestones, right? So in my opinion, it was probably a small group like that who had a lot of means. They probably had like a lot of means. They probably had $50 million, but yeah, I think that's what they did. And they were very clever, and they wanted to create mystery around the Guidestones, so they hired Freemasons to build it. They hired the United Nations to do the translations. So in my mind, it's actually not nearly as conspiratorial as most people think from looking into it. But, that's my theory. That doesn't mean I'm right. That's my educated guess about what occurred. People were saying there's a time capsule on... Yeah, I also think I know it's in the time capsule. I would predict, and I would predict with 90% certainty from reading the narcissistic language in their manifesto that the group who did it, it's probably the name of their leader and the name of their group. I would bet you. They were hoping that this monument would last for 1,000 years and be clouded in mystery and the curiosity of the world. And they were hoping that 1,000 years from now, after remaining anonymous, that they would open it and they would say, "Ta-da!" I would almost guarantee that it's their name and the name of the group in the time capsule. And it's brilliant. It really is brilliant. They studied the Stonehenge, and they said what makes Stonehenge timeless and priceless. Like, that's what they studied, and they were like, it's the mystery around it. It's the timeless nature of the stone. And they said, we can replicate that. So, anyway, I really do got to go. So, anyone interested in our homeschool community, www.classicallearner.com, Homeschools Connected. Use the discount code FREEDOM, all lowercase, $10 a month. You get access to all the courses I teach, our new science curriculum that we're rolling out, and a variety of other stuff because I'm really starting to ramp up curriculum, and that's why I wanted to take a break from the live classes because I've really been grinding trying to get this curriculum out. So anyway, check that out, and I'll be back tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. So I'll let you know where that InfoWars stuff goes, and should be interesting. I'm not familiar with the guy, but apparently he has a show on there, and he asked me to come on, so I'll do that. So all right, I will see you guys a little later, and check you tomorrow. I will now do a 10-second count off. As I need something to take in the aroma of so I don't get trolled by Marine Princess. As I take in the beautiful aroma of nature around me. And have a refreshing drink of ice water. Yeah, not the Alex Jones show, but apparently they have other shows on there, and one of their hosts asked me to come on at 11 today, so I'm going to go on there. He wanted me to talk about the Georgia Guidestones. All right, guys.